You hardly have time to put your cup of coffee down on your desk before it starts. Who would want to read this garbage? And even if it weren't garbage, which it is, I hope you realize that this has already been written like at least 10 times before. And why would you want anyone to read this so they can see how much of an idiot you are? You are not alone if this is what it sounds like inside your head. That is the kind of inner critical dialogue that plays like a commercial jingle stuck in your head on an endless loop for so many creatives. So it's natural that when your inner critic decides to make itself heard, you either reach for the claymore and chainmail, hoping to beat the beast back into some quiet corner of your consciousness, or you retreat there yourself. You're probably not going to sit still, armed with a box of tissues, ready to listen to what your inner critic has to say. And yet, that's exactly what you need to do in order to turn down the volume on your inner critic and make space to move forward. I never would have thought this when I started out, but when I became aware of the work of Nicole Lewis-Keeber, my ears pricked up. Nicole is a former clinical therapist who now works with business owners to unpack their relationships with their work and help them do no harm, which is the name of her program, to themselves or others. And she offered a crucial reframe for where this all is coming from: traumatic experiences from our childhoods, and not just big T trauma, but also small t trauma, like being repeatedly belittled, ignored, or told we're not good enough, particularly by a parent or teacher. What the inner critic is trying to do is warn you, to get you to stop whatever risky thing you're about to do, to avoid all vulnerability, and to avoid letting the part of you it's trying to protect from getting in harm's way. Your inner critic is trying, in its scary, painful, and ineffective way, to take care of you.
I don't think that we should exile our inner critic. I think that there's information there for us. There's usually some younger version of ourselves that has been wounded in some way that needs some attention when that critic comes up. I think
Mhm.
our inner critic is the protector of those younger versions of ourselves that were wounded. So if I want to give a talk and get on a stage, which I have done, keynote lots of people, my inner critic will start to say, "Who do you think you are? It's not safe. You're not wearing the right outfit. You're using notes. They're going to make fun of you." And if I take a moment and say, "I hear you. What is it that you need?" Usually what happens is there's a younger version of me that is really unhappy with the fact that I'm about to stand up in front of 300 people and give a talk, because that younger version of me still thinks that I'm dumb, I'm lazy, I have nothing to say, and that people are going to be mean to me. That critic is there to try and stop it.
Your inner critic is a trauma response. It's connected to a part of you that's been burned before, and it's trying to protect you, albeit in the most ham-fisted way possible. I've written before about taking a step back and finding a way to be more empathetic and compassionate with yourself when you're overwhelmed and blowing deadlines. Self-compassion is maybe the key to being able to finish big, wonderful, risky, creative endeavors. It's that same well of self-forgiveness you need to dip into when this wounded part of you surfaces. Because this is the thing, you literally can't silence your inner critic if you don't heal the trauma it's trying to protect you from. When students in the Creative Focus workshop share their depictions of their inner critics and what sort of insults get hurled at them, let me tell you, they sound exhausted. And not just the students, but the inner critics do too. We're tired of hearing about how we should be writing our 10th book already, and we're tired of spending all of our energy trying to silence our inner critic and just shut it down. But our inner critics are also tired of screaming for our attention. They truly think they're acting in our best interest, and they're just as exhausted, frustrated, scared, and angry as we are. In order to break this cycle of anxiety and procrastination that results in diminished confidence and self-efficacy, we need to listen to our inner critic so we can actually start to heal. There are some concrete steps you can take to get in touch with this part of yourself. Number one, identify your inner critic. Draw your should monster. Try to identify how old it seems to be, whether it's tied to someone you know from your past, like an ex-partner or a parent. What does it look like? Take some time to figure out when it usually shows up. Does it fire up its engines when you make a little mistake? Maybe it's when you're halfway into a new project and all of a sudden there are a ton of unknowns. You need to get clear on this so that you're prepared to talk to it when it decides to make its presence known. Yes, talk to it. Because number two is, when it shows up, ask your inner critic some questions. The inner critic is almost like a parentified child. It had to grow up way too soon to protect you from the thorny barbs of reality, but all it's managed to develop are maladaptive coping mechanisms. When it speaks up, say, I hear you. What do you need? Show your inner critic some empathy. Ask it what it's trying to tell you. What is it afraid of when it tries to stop you from doing the thing? Or when it starts telling you about all of the things you should be doing or should have done by now? You don't have to follow its directions. You can acknowledge the answers it gives you and learn from them. When you access your inner critic and give it space and self-compassion, it will be more likely to ease up on you. When we slow down, ask questions, and take a breath, when we stop and don't try to overwhelm and undermine that voice, we're likely to find a little bit of wisdom about something that needs to be healed. And then you can care for that part of yourself and start to move on. Number 3, learn to respond to your inner critic. You now have a more concrete idea of who this critical self is, which means you have a real place to direct your self-compassion. Respond to it with warmth rather than reflecting the negativity back at it or retreating into yourself. The next time you feel the physical signs that this part of you is trying to tell you it's afraid, tightness in the chest or the first flutters of anxiety, increased heart rate, tap into it, relate to that part of you and acknowledge the fears. Over time, it will become easier to calm yourself down. Compassion towards your inner critic will allow you to make decisions for yourself based on your goals and not your fears. This takes a lot of practice. Switching from trying to fight and beat and silence your inner critic to listening with empathy and validation is tough. Think of it this way. Your inner critic is tough. It's strong, and you are recruiting that demanding voice to add it to your team. The self-knowledge and compassion you learn from this process will be a game changer when it comes to being able to step out into the world confident and sure of yourself and ready to embrace the vulnerability that is essential to creating and sharing the best, most brilliant creative work you have bubbling up inside you.